This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
As children move from primary to secondary school, particularly into Year 7, their enjoyment of school and their overall engagement takes a very sharp dive. Why is this happening, and what does it mean for educators and parents alike?
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Need a smarter
way to teach? Wish your lessons had more...
Hey, very good morning to you. There we go. Once again, we are changing things up a little bit here in the Saturday morning breakfast studio. I'm not in my usual studio right now, and so, as always happens when I change things, things are going a little bit awry, but that's okay, because that is how we prove that we are live. But I think we're good now. I think we are good to go. The cat is settled. The music files are not auto-playing. I think we are okay to properly start. Good morning. It is Saturday, the 24th of May, 2025. This is the Saturday Breakfast Show with me, your host, Darren Lester. And we are talking today about the very worrying news that was released this week about this trend that we see in Year 7 where children fall out of love with school. Just in case you haven't been keeping up to date with the news over the past week, researchers believe that they have been able to pinpoint the exact moment in Year 7 where children stop enjoying their school time, where that enthusiasm, where that enjoyment wears off, which is very, very concerning, because they're only halfway through their schooling, a little over halfway through their compulsory schooling at that point, and we don't want them to spend the next 7 years being upset, being sad, being miserable. So that's what we are discussing today. As always, if you are listening live via Podbean, you can text in right there on your screen to join in the conversation. I will be incredibly happy to hear your views on our topic of the day. But before we get down to it, tell me how your week has been. Mine has been good. It's been very, very busy this week. A few things have been going on. Of course, we are getting ready in classics for the next batch of exams. In Latin, we've already had Language 1. That was a couple of weeks ago. Seemed to go well for my students, thankfully. I've got Verse Literature A, and I have got Literature and Culture coming up over the next couple of weeks. So I've been very busy working with my Year 11s, attempting to arrange revision sessions for half-term week. It's incredible how difficult it can be just to kind of coordinate my schedule, let alone anybody else's, to try and put revision sessions on. But I think I'm finally getting there. I hope I'm finally getting there, given that half term starts on Monday, and I need these sessions to happen next week. That on top of kind of regular schooling, making sure that everybody else is okay. And then, I don't know about you all, but my hay fever has really kicked in this week, to the point where I've started taking my anti-allergy tablets. Yesterday was the first one. I tried to put off taking tablets for as long as physically possible. I don't know why. I know that taking a tablet that is going to relieve your symptoms is an infinitely preferable alternative to just powering through. And yet, for some reason, I still choose to power through. I don't know whether that's a teacher thing. I don't know whether that's a me thing. I don't know what's going on. But yes, I have finally succumbed and started taking my tablets, which I am very happy about, because it means that I am sitting here able to talk to you without sneezing, without my eyes watering, which you don't know because you can't see me, but I'm sure the members of MFL Journal Club on Wednesday night did not appreciate how streaming I was with all of the pollen that was flying around. So yeah, we are kind of feeling good today. I've also, and I put this down to the change in air pressure, I've had really bad headaches over the past couple of days. Where I am in Gloucestershire, we've had quite an extreme change in weather over the past couple of days. We've gone from it being very, very warm, very, very sunny, the kind of weather that I don't enjoy, to all of a sudden we've had rain showers. My washing got rained on Thursday. That was not fun. But perk of working from home, perk of teaching an online school, I was able to run out and get it in when it started raining. But then if I'd been teaching in a brick and mortar school, I probably wouldn't have put it out. So swings and roundabouts, I suppose. But yeah, that sudden change, I think, has brought on a change of air pressure. So I've had kind of really bad headaches over the past couple of days, which got me thinking about last week's show, where I talked about kind of self-care versus self-preservation, and all the things that we have to do to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, to make sure that we are functioning as well and as fully as possible. And, PSA mostly to myself, this does involve taking hay fever tablets when you need to take them. It does involve going to bed after your 8 o'clock lesson if you need to. So, as we kind of make that transition into allergy season, as so many people call it, it does seem like a small thing. It does seem like a silly thing. But anything that is making us work at less than 100% is worth tackling. So I always think it's worth just doing a bit of a check-in. This was something that I learned in therapy. And it's got a name, and I can't remember what the name is. I was going to sound so smart then, but it's gone. But there is this thing that I learned where you take a couple of minutes every morning when you wake up, and you just check in with individual parts of your body. So you kind of start with your head, and you just kind of feel how your head is feeling. You just kind of make sure that you are inside your head. How is it working? Do you have a headache? Are you feeling dehydrated? Are your sinuses tight? What's going on there? Then you move down to your neck. How is your neck feeling? And you do that through all of your body, from top to bottom, from head to toes. And you just kind of do a check-in with yourself, figure out how you're feeling, and then if there is anything that you need to do to make yourself feel better, you do it straight away. Kind of before you shower, before you brush your teeth, before you have your coffee, although the coffee might be one of the things that you do to make yourself feel better. And what that does is it just starts the day with you feeling as well as you possibly can. And it starts the day with an act of self-care, with an act of self-preservation, if you like, that then sets you up to keep taking care of yourself throughout the day. I don't do that as often as I should. To be honest, I only do it when I remember to do it, because when I wake up first thing, my memory is not very good at all. But I do think it's worth doing, just checking with yourself, just to make sure that you are fully functional right from the top of the day. Tim has texted in, very good morning to you. I finished my second MA. Congratulations. That's so cool. That is very cool. Getting one MA is achievement enough, but going for a second and finishing a second is amazing. I hope that you are feeling rightfully proud of yourself, as we all are here on Saturday Morning Breakfast, because, just in case you are new to the show, Tim is a friend of the show. He was my very first and very second guest, because, technical difficulties, we are used to those. And Tim regularly comes and engages and comments, and it's always very interesting to hear what he has to say. So congratulations on that. And he learned that plane trees are responsible for a lot of us feeling extra hay fever this last week. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I will have to investigate what kind of trees we have around. I do have a lot of trees in my garden. We like the birds. We're going for a kind of not exactly a wild garden feel, but pretty much. We encourage the birds, we encourage the bees. There's a squirrel who likes to come. There was a rat this morning that my cat was not at all impressed with, and I can't say I was particularly impressed with, although it was quite interesting to sit and watch him or her eat out of the bird seed tray. Okay, now I'm just telling you about my garden. So I think this is a good time for us to move on and think about our topic of the day.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Harvard University is reportedly suing the Trump administration after it revoked the university's ability to enrol international students. The dispute, reported on the BBC News website, has escalated to what the university has called a blatant violation of the law by Trump's government. The lawsuit, filed in Boston, comes a day after officials at the Department of Homeland Security said it would be revoking Harvard's access to students' visa programs. The Trump administration says Harvard has not done enough to fight anti-Semitism and change its hiring and admissions practices. The university has strongly denied these allegations. According to the BBC, there are around 6,800 international students at Harvard, more than 27% of the year's enrolments. The university is asking for a court order to halt the move by Department for Homeland Security, and the Harvard president said, "We condemn this unlawful and unwarranted action." In response, a White House press secretary said, "If only Harvard cared this much about ending the scourge of anti-American, anti-Semitic, pro-terrorist agitators, they wouldn't be in this situation." Further details and updates on the story can be found on BBC News. Schools Week covers the latest announcement on teachers' pay in England. Teachers will get a 4% pay rise next year, after the government accepted the review body's recommendation with additional funding of £615 million coming to schools. However, government has said schools will still have to fund around 1/4 of the rise themselves, which equates to finding £400 million from school budgets. And this comes on top of savings they have already budgeted for. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said the pay award, backed by major investment, recognises the crucial role teachers play in breaking the link between background and success. Unions said that they were still concerned about whether schools could afford to make more savings. Further details and union responses can be found on the Schools Week News website. Universities in England have been told to increase efforts to prevent student suicides in a review commissioned by the Department for Education. The BBC Education's news site covers details of the report, which says universities should assess the safety of student halls and involve families more after a student has died. Its recommendations, the first to ever be issued to university leaders by a UK government, include discouraging the laying of flowers where a student has died, if it could draw attention to a suicide location. The National Review of Higher Education Suicide Deaths of Students examined 169 cases of suicide and serious self-harm, reported by 73 universities in 2023 to 24. Overall, 19 recommendations were made, including improving support for those struggling academically and reviewing access to mental health services. The Department for Education is due to meet with university leaders to discuss the findings later this month. Finally, The Guardian reports that almost half of young people would prefer a world without internet, according to a UK study. The research shows that nearly 70% of 16 to 21-year-olds feel worse about themselves after spending time on social media. Half would support a digital curfew that would restrict access to apps and sites past 10 p.m. And 46% said they would rather be young in a world without the internet altogether. The study, conducted by the British Standards Institution, surveyed 1,293 young people. Full details of the article and more of the findings can be found on the Guardian newspaper's website. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. Always really interested to hear your roundup of the news each week. You know that I love me a good study, and that last item that Joe talked about with the young people wanting to grow up in a world without the internet has really piqued my interest. Because, you know, I grew up in a world without the internet. I was one of the last generations, as kind of a firmly in the middle millennial. I was probably the last generation, to be fair, to have grown up in a world without the internet. We didn't get internet at my house until I had qualified to teach. I went all through uni kind of making use of the university library, and I was an early adopter of the smartphone, despite the fact that I hated phones. So I did have internet on my phone where I had to pay, it was like £1 a day or something for unrestricted access. So if I was looking stuff up, I would do it on my tiny little phone screen. But I think that we are better off being in a world with the internet. I think that as an adult in the world with the internet, it makes life so much easier. You know, banking is now accessible to me. So for my particular bank, all of the actual in-person branches in my area have closed. They've gone, which possibly is a result of an increase in internet banking. It's really difficult right now to identify cause and effect because we're not far enough removed from it. But without the internet, I wouldn't be able to do any kind of banking whatsoever. I wouldn't be able to check whether I've been paid. I wouldn't be able to make sure that all of my bills are coming out. I wouldn't be able to cry at how little is going into my savings. So it makes kind of adulty things so much easier. I don't think that we would have gotten through the pandemic as well as we did without access to the internet. I still firmly believe that whilst I acknowledge there were spikes in mental health crises during the pandemic for various reasons, having access to the internet allowed us to stay in touch and allowed us to socialize a lot more than we would have been able to without it, assuming that the same restrictions were put in place. This is the issue with alternate history, isn't it? Is that you just kind of tweak the bits that fit your own narrative. So yeah, I personally, I'm all for the internet. Without the internet, I wouldn't be here now. talking to all of you. Quite honestly, without the internet, I wouldn't have my career as it is right now. So for me, it's a good thing. What I do find interesting is that the young people are in favor of regulation and control. So, this idea of a curfew restricting certain apps after a certain time, because that suggests to me that they feel powerless in a world with the internet. Because as Joe was telling the story, I was thinking they have a choice. They don't have to go on social media. They don't have to have TikTok. They don't have to have Instagram. They don't have to have whatever apps it is that is causing these issues. The government doesn't need to intervene and say, oh, well, why don't you just not be able to have access to them after a certain time? They could just not go on them. But then I thought about the connection, about the peer pressure, about the fact that if you are not on these apps, then you are left out of so many social situations for these young people. I think that they are kind of the equivalent of watching, the big series. I remember when Friends ended, for example. Was I still in sixth form? Yeah, I was in sixth form. And it was kind of all anybody talked about for like 2 weeks after. And as the last series was ending, it would air on, I think, a Friday, and then on the bus to college on a Monday morning is what we talked about. And if you missed it, you wouldn't have been involved in that conversation. And I can see that for our young people, these apps work in that same way. If you haven't seen the latest viral video, if you haven't seen the latest brain rot, if you haven't seen that there's a party at somebody's house and the invite was posted on Instagram, then you're not going to be involved in that community. And as we know, community is incredibly important for our young people. I don't think that government intervention is the answer, because I think that then leads to a very slippery slope regarding policing online content. What I do think needs to happen, though, is that our young people need to be taught how to live in a world of social media. And this is still something that we haven't, as a society, got right yet. I think because the adults, us, we didn't grow up with that. I think it will get better. I think as Gen Z, the generation below me, come through and gain increasing positions of power, then they will be able to teach young people about these things, because they did have the internet at that much younger age than we did. So they kind of will understand what policies, what ideas, what practices should be put into place. But I think one of the things that we do need to consider, we as a society, is building resilience. This is something we talk about a lot, isn't it, in school? But it's making sure that we understand that somebody else's success, somebody else's happiness does not detract from our own. There isn't a finite amount of happiness. The world doesn't have 100 happinesses, and so if somebody else has one, that means that you don't. It's not limited edition, it's not a collector's item. It is something that everybody can engage in. And so if we are just looking at comparison, if we're just looking at people seeing the curated feeds and going, oh, I wish my life was like that, then that is something that is quite easy to tackle, because we can think about gratitude practices. We can think about teaching our young people how to appreciate what they have, and the enjoyment of ambition to try and get something that they don't, which is something that as British people we don't do very well. I've talked about this on the show before. In fact, a few weeks ago, I did a show on how the education system continues to fail working class boys. And I talked a lot about class in that one, and how in the UK, we are still very much a classist society. We still don't like the idea of somebody going above their station. We don't look at ambition particularly favourably. And I think, if we were to tackle that, then we might see fewer issues stemming from our young people being online, stemming from this comparison, because we would see them working towards bettering their own lives instead of just being jealous of, resentful of something that other people have. Now, of course, that's not going to stop online trolling. That's not going to stop online bullying. That's not going to stop online hate. That's a whole separate issue that needs to be addressed. But if we can start by tackling self-esteem, if we can start by tackling resilience, and if we can start by teaching our young people that, as opposite as it may sound, you should be grateful for the things that you do have and work towards having the life that you want, whilst teaching media literacy and making sure that they understand that somebody's curated feed is not an example of their life 24 hours a day. They still need to cut their toenails. They still need to pluck their eyebrows. They still need to do all of the human stuff without a filter, without spending 20 minutes artfully arranging their flat lay. Then I think our young people would be in a better position to deal with what they're exposed to while they're online, while they are in that phase of life that they feel like they have to be on these same apps. I will say that since I came away from X and Blue Sky, and I've still not gone back to them, I have found myself less worried about the state of education. So my X and my Blue Sky accounts, they were both teacher accounts. They were geared towards following other teachers. They were geared towards keeping up with educational news. And while I do feel like I've fallen away from a lot of people, and while I know that my voice is currently not as prevalent as it was, as I would like it to be, whether or not I deserve to have a voice out there is a whole other issue. I am aware that I'm no longer spending my days reading other people's negative opinions, because let's be honest, there is a lot of negativity in the online space. And so I'm not taking that in as part of my own thought processes. I'm not sure that I can say that I'm happier about it, or happier without it, because like I said, I am having to kind of reconsider my career strategy, because social media was a big part of that, a big part of kind of getting my voice out there, getting my opinions, my thoughts, my research shared. But the framing on social media is always so negative, and it is generally better for me, I think, without having that in, or without having that being drip fed to me. So maybe that's something else we need to do. Maybe we need to think about our positionality online, why it is that we tend to use online spaces as a place to complain, rather than as a place to celebrate. And the answer to that, again, at least for those of us in the UK, I think does come down to our classist structure and this idea that if you're celebrating something, then you are showing off, you are trying to rise above your station, which we don't like. There's a whole thing that I'm sure psychologists are investigating, which is really, really interesting. But that's not what we are here to talk about today. We are here today because in the week, or it may have been last week, time is non-existent. I have noticed this since teaching online, because I very rarely need to know what day of the week it is. I need to know when it's Saturday, so that I come and do the show. But other than that, my students will quite often email me and say, "Oh, can we have a class tomorrow?" And I'll just say, "Yeah, that's fine." I very rarely need to know what day of the week it is. So everything kind of blends together. So it was either this week or last week, I don't remember, but we had some research published where the researchers, or the headlines were saying that the researchers had pinpointed the exact moment that year sevens fell out of love with school. And we talked about this a little bit in Journal Club on Wednesday because our article for the month was all about transition in MFL between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 and how we can facilitate that transition. If you're an MFL teacher and you are not a member of TTR MFL Journal Club, please do sign up via our website. It's always an amazing discussion. I love picking out the articles, I love sending the articles, and then I love hearing what other people have to say about them because, as I've said before, I am a social constructivist. I very much believe that that knowledge is made by sharing, knowledge is constructed by working with other people. And so, of course, the more voices we have, the more input we have, the better. But one of the things that we concluded on was that lack of decent transition between year 6 and year 7 is one of the things to blame for this idea of year 7s losing that eagerness, losing that love of school, and kind of becoming the typical year 8, year 9 classes that we all dread coming into our lessons. And so that got me thinking kind of about this article, about how we can tackle it, because we concluded that it's very sad. We hated the conclusions that came out. We hated the idea of these kids having been so eager to go to school in primary, having been so excited about school in primary, coming to secondary and then suddenly falling out of love with it. And you know, I've been out of primary for a long time now, but I used to teach primary. I was a year 6 teacher. Annalise, who is one of my mods at Journal Club, she has gone the other way and is currently a year 6 teacher. And we both talked about how upsetting it is that we see these kids who love school when they come to us in year 6. You know, they enjoy themselves, they have fun. And then they come back and they visit us when they go into year 7, because they do that sometimes. They will go and pick up siblings, or maybe it's a parents' evening, or maybe they're just feeling a bit nostalgic and they want to come back and show you how grown up they are. So they'll come back and visit. And it is always sad if they say that they're not enjoying school or they're not enjoying your lesson, your subject specialism, your favorite lesson. And of course, we want to stop that. So now that we know it's happening, and now that apparently we know the precise moment that it happens, hopefully we can do something to combat it. But that's what we're going to talk about today. So as I've already said, if you are interested in today's topic, then please do text in if you are listening live via Podbean, because I will be very interested to hear your opinions. So, the most striking finding of this study, for me, was that steep, rapid decline in school enjoyment between year 6 and year 7. And the fact that this drop was even more severe for students who are eligible for free school meals. The study found that over a quarter of students began to disengage by the end of year 7. So just in that one academic year, over 25% of our students stop engaging, they stop enjoying school. They found, when they analysed emotional engagement, they found that students' happiness about going to school, so, I think it was a survey they conducted, how happy are you about going to school? In year 6, the average score was 6 out of 10, which, is not great, but it's not bad. It's, it's okay. Still some work to be done, but we'll take that. You can't expect it to be 10 out of 10 because everybody would much rather be at home playing on their PlayStation or reading or watching TV or whatever it might be. But that dropped very severely to 3.8 out of 10 in year 7. And it then dropped again, not nearly as severely, but it did drop again to 3.2 out of 10 in year 8. And that's really sad. That's really sad, especially when, as teachers, we do put a lot of work, a lot of effort into making sure that our lessons are engaging and enjoyable. You know, we learn about the games that we can play. We look for the videos that we can watch. We do our best with the curricula that we have to try and make sure that our children do like being in the classroom. But they really, really don't. And that is a massive drop, isn't it? From, again, 6 out of 10 in year 6 down to 3.8 out of 10 in year 7, and still decreasing as they go into year 8. Now, there was a separate study conducted that I looked at because I wanted to find out kind of about enjoyment in school. I wanted to find out what students enjoy, to think about where it goes wrong in that year 7 year. So I read this study of 3,000 students in England, which explored student enjoyment in secondary and how we can improve it. So it was from 2011, so it is an old study. And I think it needs to be updated. I couldn't find a more recent study specifically about student enjoyment in England. I understand why it's very difficult to conduct research with young people. There is a whole branch of ethics that need to be dealt with when you are conducting research with young people, which quite frankly puts people off. So I always set myself a challenge every week to get through a show without mentioning my doctorate. I haven't achieved it yet. I thought I was going to this week, but I'm about to fail. Or actually, I've just failed because I did just say the word, but I'm about to fail. Because when I applied for my doctorate, I had initially applied to do a topic very similar to this, looking at engagement in language learning and how we can improve it. But kind of, quite honestly, reading through the ethical guidelines of conducting research with young people prompted me to change my topic and pursue something that I'm also very interested with teachers, because there are still ethical guidelines that need to be followed, but there are fewer hoops to jump through. And, quite frankly, when you are doing research for a qualification and you want to pass it, you are going to make the pathway as easy as possible. So I don't know whether practicing teachers will ever be able to conduct this type of research, because it's not something that is easily done as a piece of action research, and it's not something that is easily done for a research degree. But hopefully there will be people working in institutes of education at universities who will be picking up on what has come through this week about that year 6 to year 7 and that year 7 year with regards to enjoyment, and they will conduct their own research, because I think it really does need to be updated. But this is the most recent research that we have. Like I said, it's from 2011, and it is exactly what I wanted, because it is specifically about enjoyment of secondary education in England, which is where I teach, so it's what is most relevant to me. It does kind of beg the question, why are we focusing on enjoyment? And this is something that comes up quite a lot in discussions and kind of in the comments on the articles summarizing this research that I've read, there is a lot of talk about, oh, well, you can't enjoy everything. Life isn't always about being happy. You can't always love what you're doing. We don't all love our jobs, so children don't have to love school. And I understand that that's kind of it's trying to be supportive and it's trying to be helpful, because it's saying that this is just how life works. And so, schools are not at fault, teachers are not at fault, humans are just programmed not to enjoy everything, which is true to an extent. There are things that I liked school, but there were certain subjects that I did not enjoy, that I dreaded, that I faked being ill to try and get out of. But my question is why can't we enjoy ourselves? Why do we just accept that not everything is fun and we just kind of have to suck it up? Or at least, why is that always our gut reaction, our gut response to being told that things are not enjoyable? Why do we always go there instead of trying to make them better? And again, I'm not saying that we all need to be hedonists. I worry sometimes that kind of with my focus on self-care and self-preservation and mental health, I sound like I think we should all just be perpetual hedonists. I don't think that. But I do think that life is hard. And so as much as possible, we should make it as enjoyable as possible for ourselves and for other people. And so that's why for me, because there were lots of factors at play in this article. And, I'll talk about a few more of them later, but it was the enjoyment one that jumped out at me, because for me, it is the enjoyment aspect that is most important.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Enjoyment is important because it is ultimately a pathway to engagement. Other research finds that if children enjoy school, then their attendance increases, their inclusion increases, and their desire for lifelong learning increases. Because you're teaching them right from the beginning that learning is interesting, learning is fun. And that, I think, is a base belief of all teachers, because if we didn't think that, we wouldn't be teaching. We have a lot of hats, and I know that there are teachers who are particularly interested in pastoral roles, who are particularly interested in leadership roles. There are all sorts of career pathways for teachers. But ultimately, I kind of think that we chose to be teachers because we think learning is a good thing. Because you can have a pastoral role by being an educational psychologist, by being a social worker. You can have leadership roles by going into business. At our core as teachers, I do believe that education, that learning is central to what drives us. And we have this belief that learning is fun, that learning is interesting, that learning is enjoyable. It's why we try and pass that on to our young people. And yet many of our young people, as we have seen, find school boring, they find it uninspiring. So this secondary study, this one of oh gosh, how many was it? 3,000? Yeah, 3,000 students. The students were interviewed about their experiences of school, about whether or not they enjoy school, in order to have their voice heard. Now, there are, of course, a few issues with the concept of pupil voice. The first is the extent to which the young people are telling the truth, which is not to say that they are deliberately lying, but we do know that young people kind of fall into two camps. Quite often they will tell you what they think you want to hear, and quite often they will parrot back ideas that are prevalent, that are popular within their social group, regardless of whether or not they actually believe them. They may not have thought about whether or not they believe them. It's just like the prevailing idea of the group. But then that can be said of research with all types of people. And so, I think while it is important for us to recognize that there are certain issues within research models, if we're going to take research seriously at all, we have to create a level playing field. And if I'm happy to believe that the adults that I would interview for a research paper are telling me the truth instead of telling me what they think I want to hear or what their social group thinks is acceptable, then I have to believe the same of young people. So that's kind of the stance that I'm coming at this study from. You'll have to forgive the cat if you can hear her today. She's very excited about us being somewhere different to host the show, and she very much would like to be involved. Please, thank you. So in this study, of these 3,000 young people, 44% of year 11 students reported that they enjoyed school. 38% said that they found most of their lessons interesting. And those are very, very low figures, aren't they? They're actually lower than had been previously reported. So bearing in mind this was in 2011, those figures are lower than before then. So perhaps, a study had been conducted when I was in school in 2001. Was I year 11 in 2001? Yes. So there had been a decrease up until 2011, and we have got those incredibly low numbers. 44% of year 11 students enjoy school, 38% say that their lessons are interesting. And this is, again, with their teachers, I am sure, doing everything they can to make their lessons interesting, to make their lessons inspiring. It's one of the things that gets talked about all the time at CPD during observations. Are our lessons engaging? Are our lessons inspiring? So it is something that as teachers we know that we need to be doing. I think it's something as teachers we think we're doing, but that isn't coming across to the young people. And since our lessons are supposed to be engaging for and inspiring to them, it is worth listening to what they have to say. We are the experts in pedagogy. We are the ones who best know how to teach our subject, how to transmit the knowledge, how to make sure that they learn the content. But if what we're going for is inspiration, engagement, and enjoyment, the children need to be involved in that, because that's not something that we as the teachers can know. We can sit there and say, yes, I'm incredibly inspiring, I'm incredibly engaging. And we may be inspiring and engaging to ourselves, but it's our young people, our audience, who ultimately get to make that call, because they're the ones who are supposed to be affected by our inspiration and our engagement. And the thing is, on a personal level, I don't know how many of us would want to ask that question. I don't know how many of us would want to do a pupil voice with our year 11s, our year 9s, whoever it may be, and honestly say, am I, Mr. Lester, your teacher, engaging? Am I inspiring? because we know that we might not like the answer that we get. The key determinants of enjoyment, according to this study, were autonomy in learning. So these young people, they wanted autonomy. When I was training, we learned to kind of give a false sense of autonomy. And I remember this being done to me when I was at school. I don't know if anybody else kind of the same age as me had this happen to, whether it was maybe a fad in like the 90s. But I remember, particularly in year 3, but it was all throughout my junior schooling, we were a 2-form entry school. We were called together, so the whole year group sat together in the kind of, it was called the practical area. It was a space in between the 2 classrooms where we had all the art stuff and the DT stuff, and there were sinks and stuff like that. And the 2 class teachers would tell us what our new topic was going to be, and then they would pull out a big flip chart, and on the sugar paper they would write down all the stuff that we said we wanted to learn about that topic. So they would say, right, our topic is ancient Egypt. What do you want to know about ancient Egypt? And we would tell them. And they would kind of do it. They would say, oh, today we're going to learn about how mummies were made. And we would be like, oh, this is what John said he wanted to know about. So, we kind of assumed that the teachers were listening to us. Now, as a teacher, and having been kind of trained in this deception, I know that ultimately all young people kind of want to learn the same sorts of things. So the stuff that was being taught to us was probably the stuff that was in the scheme of work that our teachers were following anyway. And they were still following the national curriculum because they had to. They just kind of skewed it in a way that made it look like we were in control of what we were learning, that made it look like we had an input. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's right to gaslight our children. I'm not at all suggesting that it's right to tell them that they're having an input in our lessons and then ignoring it, because that's worse almost than not giving them a voice at all. But I think what that proved is that if you ask young people in your subject what they want to learn, it's likely that it will be what is in the curriculum anyway. And if we do that in years 7, 8, and 9, where we have this really sharp decrease in school enjoyment, we can do that, and we can tailor our lessons, and we can alter the curriculum if we want to, our own curriculum if we want to, without it necessarily affecting what's happening at GCSE. Because obviously in years 10 and 11, we are a bit more constrained in what we teach based on whichever GCSE paper we're teaching. But in Key Stage 3, where we have a bit more autonomy over what we're teaching, we can give our learners a bit of autonomy over what they're learning. But that isn't restricted to Key Stage 3. A former colleague of mine, head of German, she always really inspired me because every single year she would change the book that she taught. I always taught the same one to my A-level Chinese class because I had read the book, I'd done the research on it, I knew everything there was to know about the author and about the context of the book, and so I just always taught that one because, it was easier for me. But this particular teacher, she would always kind of produce the list of books for her class. She would tell them what the books were about, and she would ask them which one they wanted to study. Even if that meant she then had to go and read it and learn about it herself before teaching it, like immediately before teaching it. So even up at the very top end of compulsory education, we can give our learners a sense of autonomy. We can't give them complete autonomy because of the way our system is structured, but we can give them something. There are always ways to give them a choice, and that autonomy in learning is a determiner of enjoyment. Social relationships are very, very important in terms of enjoyment. Children are very social. We know this. Their friends, particularly as they get to the middle part of secondary, their friends are the most important thing to them. And quite often it's the socialization that is stripped away, because quite often it's the socialization that starts to cause problems. I don't know whether it's still a thing, but I remember in kind of September, so very early part of this academic year, when silent corridors were the way to go. And I remember commenting on it because I couldn't understand when the children were talking to their friends. If they weren't allowed to talk to each other in lessons and they weren't allowed to talk to each other in the corridor, when were they talking to each other? And I think sometimes where we go wrong with our behavior management is taking away that ability for our children to be children and to talk to their friends and to have that socialization that they crave, and that, you know, parts of their body need, parts of their brain need in order to properly function. Respect from teachers is very, very important in determining whether or not a child enjoys their time at school. If a child feels belittled, if they feel disrespected, they will not enjoy their time there. And that's something that I've heard quite a lot. Kind of just, you know, having restorative conversations with children, kind of when they've come into my lesson in a bad mood and I've tried to figure out what was going wrong. One of the principal causes of that has often been a child feeling like they were disrespected. Children don't like to be treated like children. And I think if you can find that middle ground, if you can find a way to respect them as people while maintaining your authority as the teacher, that will help to raise enjoyment. And the last thing that came up in this study, it was a little bit vague. It was quite wishy-washy. It was varied, practical, and engaging lessons. Now, of course, they're going to enjoy their lessons if their lessons are engaging. It's what makes a lesson engaging that we need to know. But we learned that the young people don't feel engaged. They don't feel like they're enjoying their lessons when they're being lectured at. And I think this comes or is linked to the autonomy. They want to explore things for themselves. They want to talk about the concepts. They want to try and figure it out for themselves. And, you know, practical means of doing that are quite often the best way to do it. Now, that's not always easy. It's not always possible. There are some things that are just theoretical that they have to know. Sometimes me just telling you the answer is the easiest way to get there. And so I think, you know, this isn't about all of our lessons being practical. It's not about the teacher never saying anything and the students always coming in and experiencing their learning for themselves. I think that one, it's got to be about finding a middle ground. Because again, we are the teachers, we are in the room because we know the stuff already. And it is our job to figure out whether we are teaching it outright, whether we are just standing up at the front and saying to them, these are your verb endings, or whether we are giving them a list of verbs and saying to them, what do you notice all of these verbs have in common? Or are we giving them a whole paragraph and we're saying to them, please can you identify the verbs and then tell me what they have in common? And that's where our own pedagogical knowledge comes in, regarding the best way to teach it. Because ultimately, that is our aim, isn't it? Is finding the most efficient way to get our young people to know what we're trying to teach them. But if one of the most efficient ways is by having them engaged, then we do need to find practical ways to do that. And it becomes a bit of a cycle, doesn't it, about what takes priority over something else. Things that were found to be positive influences on whether or not children enjoyed their lessons, or what children said they enjoyed about school, were small class sizes. And I think this comes down to relationships. Children are very much relationship forming creatures. So if you have a smaller class size, then obviously you get more attention from the teacher, so you can form a better relationship with the teacher. And that tends to be the thing that we focus on when we talk about small class sizes. But it also means that you get better relationships with the other people in your class. But there is a caveat to that, which I think is that this only works if you have different children in your classes for different subjects. When I taught primary, the smallest class that I ever had was 19. And they were 19, kind of give or take. I think they were 14 at one point, but children came in and left. But they were basically a unit of 19 from reception to year 6. And by the time they got to year 6, you could tell that they were ready to meet new people, because they had kind of got sick, really, of interacting with each other. They knew each other really, really well. And for the most part, they got on as a unit really, really well, which is what we want in these small class sizes. But when they fell out, oh, did they fall out? And so what we want, ideally, I think, are small class sizes so that children can form good relationships with the teacher and with the other people in their class, but where classes are made up of different people, so that they don't find themselves consistently with the same people over and over again, so that they don't start to get on each other's nerves, quite frankly. Children value opportunities for discussion. They want to be able to talk things through. We know this from when we go to inset. There's nothing worse than an inset day where you are just sat and being lectured at all day. And you then have to go back to your department, back to your classroom with your teacher bestie, whatever it might be, and talk about what you've learnt in your own time. So in the same way that we want those opportunities for discussion at inset days, children want those opportunities for discussion in our classrooms. They like practical work, as we've already discussed, and very importantly, they like visits. Now, visits can be really difficult in secondary because curriculum time is limited. Because children already miss for sporting events, they already miss for half days at Christmas and Easter. They already miss for subjects that have compulsory fieldwork elements. So to then be able to take them on a trip somewhere just because that's good for their learning, it becomes harder to justify because you're taking them out of other people's subjects. Can I justify taking a class on a day trip to Bath so that we can go and see the Baths for GCSE Latin, if it means that on that day they're also going to miss English and maths and science and PE and music? The answer is probably not, because those teachers will not be very happy at having their curriculum time lost for my trip. But trips are very important. And so what we find is that trips start happening after school or during holidays in time that teachers are not paid for. So many drama trips occur after school. A lot of that is the nature of seeing a play. You know, most plays are put on in the evening, so that kind of makes sense. But so many drama and English teachers actually will give up their own time to be able to put on a trip to the theatre to see whatever set text they're studying being performed. My trip to France always took place during the Easter holidays. because absolutely not were we taking those children out for a whole week in term time, because the children would miss a whole week of school. We would require a whole week of cover. It just wasn't an option. So we did it because we wanted our children to have that experience, but it was in our own unpaid time. But it was worth doing because the children had that opportunity to practice their French and to see parts of France that they maybe never would have visited before. The children like trips. Adults like trips. I saw a meme the other day that was like, why are field trips only for children? Wouldn't it be great if we could all take the day off work to go and learn how a watermill works? And I was like, yes, exploring this stuff is interesting. It really is. We just can't do it because we're so pressed for time. And so maybe that's something that needs to be considered. If schools are going to have the time to run trips, which children say they enjoy, they say they want, maybe our curriculum needs to be a bit less packed. They like respectful, adult-like relationships with teachers. Children want to be respected. They don't want to be treated like children. They don't want us to treat them like their parents do. They want us to treat them like people. Now, you can say this goes both ways, and as teachers, we will respect the children if they respect us. But the same can be said from the child's point of view, that they will respect you as a teacher if you respect them as a learner. So, as trite as building positive relationships is, and as much as it is not the cure-all that so many educational celebrities want you to believe it is actually quite important in helping children to enjoy their time at school. Making sure that they feel respected, making sure that they feel heard. Now, the last thing that had a really positive influence on child enjoyment and engagement, interestingly, was the support and accessibility of staff. Children wanted to know that if they were struggling with something, they could go to a teacher and have it worked through with them. They basically wanted extra tuition. And for me, that was really interesting because it shows that actually the children are wanting to learn. This lack of engagement, this lack of enjoyment is not because they don't want to be in school learning. It's because there are these factors potentially stopping them from learning. Now, again, it's really difficult as a teacher to be able to offer clinics, to be able to offer drop-ins and say, if you are struggling with your homework, I will be in my classroom from 3:30 until 4:30 every single day. Come on by and I'll help you. Because that's another hour of our time unpaid that we might not have. But it is potentially something, if we can fix this recruitment issue, that can be put into place. Because the more teachers there are, the fewer individual classes we all have to teach. Therefore, the more time we will have to give to our young people. Similarly, as I've argued for before, if we have staff in schools who are pastoral specialists, if we have educational psychologists and counsellors, and they are the ones who are the form tutors and who are the homeschool liaison, and maybe they don't teach and their whole job is just to do the pastoral side of school, that would free up time for teachers to be able to say, yes, when you're in tutor period, I will be in my classroom. If you want to, or your tutor allows it, drop in to come and see me. But once again, that relies on there being more staff in school, which relies on there being more funding for school wages. And given, as Joe told us in the news, schools are going to be expected to make up some of the shortfall of this 4% pay rise, that's not going to happen. So we have to say to ourselves, we know that accessibility of staff is important for school enjoyment. We know that that's not going to be paid time. Are we willing to volunteer that time, to donate that time? And that's a decision that only we as individuals, I think, are able to make.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
So we've talked about what the children want, what they perceive as being best for their education. What is it that stands in the way? What are those barriers to enjoyment? And quite a few were identified in this study. The first, interestingly, was disruptive behavior from their peers. So if their classmates are messing about, if they are being distracting, if they're being poorly behaved, that is a barrier to enjoying the lesson. So good behavior management will actually increase enjoyment in lessons, and so it will increase overall satisfaction with the school experience. But this is not to say that this is the responsibility of an individual teacher. It's not saying that we all now need to go off and do a whole range of behavior management courses. It is to say that schools need rigorous, robust behavior management processes that are followed to prevent the disruptive behavior happening right from the outset. Because disruption can be dealt with, but it's already happened. So it's already impacted the enjoyment of the lesson. If we can stop the disruption from happening, if we can get in there first by making sure the students know what the consequences are, that there will be consequences for their disruption, and so it behooves them not to be disruptive, then we begin to win that battle. Lack of rapport with teachers is another barrier to enjoyment. That's an interesting one, I think, because we only control half of that. It's kind of like I talk about with the teaching and learning relationship. We do the teaching bit, they do the learning bit. We can do our best to build rapport with children, to build those positive relationships, but that needs to be reciprocated by them. It's not all on us. It's not all about us. Passive, repetitive lessons. So they don't like doing the same thing over and over again, which is a shame because sometimes they need to. But I think if you explain that to them, and if you say, look, I'm really sorry that I'm having to reteach you the Future Perfect, but I marked your work from yesterday and it was clear that you didn't understand it, so we're going to go about it again in a different way, thus treating them like adults and explaining why the lesson is having to be repetitive. That might do something to kind of negate that. There's also a lot to be said about that fine line between repetitive and routinous. So we know that children like routine. We know that they like to know what to expect because that helps them to feel safe. And it's about how you build those routines without making things repetitive. And I do think content is a big barrier to that. But again, I don't believe that any teacher sits down and says, right, I'm going to plan exactly the same lesson for tomorrow as I taught today. And I don't believe any teacher says, right, I've got year 9 tomorrow morning, I'm going to pull out this lesson from year 8 that they did last year and I'm going to teach it to them. So I think a little bit more research into what exactly children consider to be repetitive would be useful, would be helpful, so that we can know what about this repetition is us doing something wrong, and what about this repetition is their perception that needs to be changed. And finally, the biggest barrier was lack of support and lack of teacher respect. It was really interesting that in this study, a lack of teacher respect was kind of a running theme. Now, again, it might be because, again, this is the 2011 study that I'm talking about right now. It might be that has changed in the last 14 years, kind of as building positive relationships with young people has become a whole thing, a whole industry almost. It might be that they are feeling more respected. But at least in 2011, that was being one of the biggest barriers to enjoyment of lessons, to enjoyment of school. And so it is an important thing for us to consider. Also important for us to think about is what doesn't matter. What did they not think was important when it came to their enjoyment of school? Because we don't want to waste our time combating the wrong things. And the 2011 study found that school enjoyment is not tied to socioeconomic status. So we're not particularly targeting working class people. We're not particularly saying private schools are more enjoyable than state schools are, because that's completely a non-issue. Academic ability doesn't matter. So we're not finding that the brighter kids are enjoying school more than the less able. We're not finding that the lower attaining lessons are more enjoyable because they are more practical, because there is a quote unquote simpler curriculum to get through than the higher ability, the higher attainment lessons. And school type and region were not an issue. It was one of the few places that we didn't have a north-south divide, which was very, very nice. And again, it didn't matter whether it was a state school or a fee-paying school. It didn't matter whether it was boarding or day. It didn't matter whether it was grammar or comprehensive. These things were universal, which means that system-wide changes can be made. The fact that in the past 14 years they don't seem to have been made, or at least this hasn't been big news, or at least they can't have been made, because we are still seeing that 6 out of 10 enjoyment of school in year 6 dropping to 3.8 in year 7. And that was by research that has been conducted in the past couple of years. That means that we need to make these changes on a wide-ranging institutional policy level. That's not to say that boosting enjoyment requires structural reform, because clearly it doesn't. It's about embracing variety, it's about embracing respect, and it's about embracing support across all schools to make learning as enjoyable as possible for all young people. And yes, that probably means that there needs to be a cash injection for staffing. And At some point, we need to stop talking about how there needs to be more money in education to make it better, and we need to start finding that money. We need to start being given that money, because time and time again, the research is pointing out these flaws that we as the individual teachers can't particularly deal with, because there does need to be a wider, more economical impact. I can change how I relate to my students. I can't hire an assistant. I don't even get paid enough for me, let alone to pay somebody else's wages. Going back to the recent article then, just to kind of sum up, because this show has really been focused on the enjoyment. So I pulled together this recent article and the 2011 research. Just to finish up, we will go back through and talk about the last other issues that were uncovered in this recent article. There are gender disparities, but not necessarily in the way that you might think. So in this recent article, it was found that girls feel safer than boys do in primary school. But by year 9, that has flipped and they feel significantly less safe. So in primary, we need to be looking at what is going on with the boys that they are not feeling so safe. And at secondary, we need to be looking at what's going on with the girls that they're not feeling so safe. And we need to address those issues, because that emotional shift for girls, going from feeling safe in school to feeling unsafe in school, that can deeply affect their well-being and their learning. If school goes from being a place that they felt safe to being a place that they didn't, then that's going to massively drop their enjoyment. Students who feel engaged are 10 percentage points less likely to be persistently absent. Because if you feel like school is worth your time, if you feel like it's a good place to be, then you're going to want to go there. And so you're going to go. We know that there is an attendance issue at the moment, likely in a large part, not exclusively, but in a large part brought about by this fact that 3.8% of our end of year 7 students are not enjoying school. And why would you go somewhere if you don't want to? Particularly if you don't perceive what you're getting out of it. As adults, if we say, I really can't face going into work today, we can at least tell ourselves, I do need to earn my wage. I need to go in so that I get paid. I need to be able to afford my mortgage. Whereas for young people, because they don't have a financial incentive, but they also don't have those long-term goals. In year 7, year 11, getting my GCSEs seems like a lifetime away. And even if you tell them the stuff that I'm teaching you now could well come up in your GCSEs, they're not going to see that as being an incentive to still attend. So we need to look at, why do they go to school? Why do we have them in our classroom to start with? And a lot of that is about the enjoyment of learning. We want them to come to school because we want them to want to learn. And they're going to enjoy their learning a lot more if their lessons are enjoyable. Axiom Maths did a survey that saw the number of students calling school fun dropping from 73% in primary to 58% in year 7. Those who called school stressful rose from 42% in year 6 to 50% in year 7. I don't think that school should be stressful for year 7s. They're 12 years old. And so I think we need to look at what are the causes of this stress and what we can do to unpick that. We need to identify who our at risk of falling out of love with school students are, particularly in year 7, because we know that this is going to have a long-term impact. We need to make sure that we are providing the extra support that they need. We need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep our lessons relevant, engaging, enjoyable, autonomous, so that they want to be there. Ultimately, not one of us can force a child to enjoy school. Not one of us can make a child enjoy their time in our classroom. Not one of us can force a child to attend. That's not our job. We are teachers. What we can do is make our lessons enjoyable, engaging, discussion heavy, interesting. We can show the children what it is that we love about learning and what we love about our subject, and hope that some of that rubs off on them, so that they will then make the choice to be there. Or even if they don't come full of enthusiasm and they don't choose to be in school, even if they were offered the day off, they understand why they're there and they don't resent their time in our classrooms. It's really sad that we have got to the point where children feel this way about school. It's really sad that we've got to the point where children feel this way about learning. But I don't think that this is rock bottom. I think if we're not careful, these numbers are going to keep plummeting. And I think now that this research has been conducted, and now that it has been widely reported, because it's not just education outlets that have been reporting this, we've had it in the TES, but it's also been in various newspapers through the week. Now is the time for us to start doing something about it. And when I say us, I don't just mean teachers, because we are relatively limited in the power that we have. I mean us as a society. I mean us as parents. Well, you as parents. I'm not a parent. So those of you who have children, you as parents, making sure that your children understand why school is important. Policymakers, understanding why extra funding for school staff is good for our young people, as well as being good for the economy because it's creating jobs. As people creating exams and creating qualifications, making sure that those curricula allow for discussion, allow for enjoyment, allow for autonomy of learning. And just kind of reprioritizing the place of education in this country, getting rid of that stigma of lifelong qualifications, of going to classes just because it's interesting, just because it's fun. Where has that gone, where every single sitcom soap involving a character over the age of about 50 would have them attending a night course as a way to meet people, as a way to improve themselves? Because that was a staple trope in the 80s and the 90s, but that's gone away. We've had this cultural shift to where we don't even talk about education anymore in the wider context, unless it's to complain about schools and complain about teachers. So it's no wonder that there is this general malaise when it comes to the nature of education, when it comes to going to school. We need to change that tide. We need to change that conversation. We need to make it more positive. We need to remind people why learning is interesting, why learning is fun. And on that note, I will leave you to enjoy your bank holiday weekend. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I hope that it's given you something to think about. I hope that if you haven't been reading all of the comments that have come off of this research, you do, because I think the more informed we all are, the better. Do stay tuned, because Famida, I think, is on at 1 o'clock today with the lunchtime show, so keep an ear out for that one. I will chat with you all, I'm sure, in various places during the week. Enjoy your bank holiday weekend, enjoy your half term, and until next Saturday's breakfast, thank you very much and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.